Great, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Kotra, for organizing this event. It looks like a great audience, and really enjoyed the sessions so far. So it's really a pleasure to be on stage here with a large group, but joined by a pretty diverse set of folks from the startup world, from the US and from Israel. We have some large corporations, venture investors, and we've actually mixed it up with some local flavor as well to talk to you about future mobility. So what I'll quickly do is I'll introduce myself, and then I'm going to ask my panelists to just quickly introduce themselves and talk about, for a minute or two, of what they're working on. So just briefly about myself, Managing Director at GE Ventures. So we're the corporate venture capital arm of General Electric. We are based in Silicon Valley with offices in Boston and in Israel. So I'm personally currently located in Israel. I have 12 years of venture capital experience across the US, Israel, and Europe. And we are investing around the digital transformation of industry. And this is really essentially around getting access to data and new technologies and influencing legacy businesses such as mobility, energy, and manufacturing. We've already invested in more than half a dozen companies in the mobility space and have about 65 portfolio companies overall. And so it's great to be on stage with my co-panelists here who also look very much at the same industry. So maybe I'll pass it over to Daniel from AutoTech Ventures to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting us all to this event. It's a great honor to be here in South Korea. My name is Daniel Hoffer. I'm a managing director at AutoTech Ventures. We are an independent venture capital fund based in Silicon Valley. We have over $200 million under management right now. We're actually in the middle of raising our second fund. And we have a differentiated model of partnering with large corporations across the ground transportation industry to deliver them financial returns as well as strategic insights and visibility into trends and companies that could impact them and shape the ecosystem. We have over 20 portfolio companies currently in a mix of areas ranging from sensor technology and autonomous related technology to also things like marketplaces and fintech. We invest all over the world. We're a multi-stage fund, but we tend to focus on the early stage, approximately Series A, sometimes a little bit later, sometimes a little bit earlier. And we will invest in any type of company that touches anything with wheels. So whether or not it's sensor technology or EV, or also marketplaces or fintech or SaaS that relates to ground transportation, so long as it's ground transportation, we are available and interested.
Great, thanks so much. Jarek from Google Machine Learning TensorFlow.
Hello, my name is Jarek Wilkiewicz. Thank you for having me. I've been with Google for 9 years, work for Google Research now on TensorFlow. TensorFlow is a machine learning platform. Some of you might have heard of it. My focus is production machine learning, which is how do we actually introduce machine learning models safely into products. Google has a lot of experience in that space. In fact, the team that I joined originally was working on an older generation system called Sybil that has been developed over a period of 12 years. And now we actually work on a new system called TFX, short for TensorFlow Extended, that I program manage. And that system is replacing Sybil. So we have been at it for quite some time. And I think this is quite interesting to pretty much every industry. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Gunhee from Hyperloop Transport Technologies.
Yes, I'm from Gunhee. I'm from Hyperloop Transportation Technologies. My name is Gunhee Han. Maybe I should start with an intro to Hyperloop. So it's a capsule-shaped vehicle carrying about 45 passengers traveling inside a vacuum tube. We're really bringing the airplane speeds onto ground level safely, efficiently, and even eco-friendly. So imagine, what if we can travel from Seoul to Busan in just 16 minutes, 1/6? What do you think we can do? Well, you live in Busan, doing your daily commute to your job in Seoul with an affordable ticket price. Basically, we're bringing the cities to become neighborhoods. At the same time, we're tackling the challenges of the modern society, such as congestion, air pollution, and even housing. This is not a futuristic concept. This is happening here today. We already have a full-scale capsule and tube ready for testing and optimization. Later this year in Abu Dhabi, we're going to start the construction of the first commercial line Hyperloop. So now we're really looking forward to collaborating with these other mobilities, AI applications, and see how we can coexist and co-design the next generation mobility ecosystem together. So very excited.
Great, thanks so much. Kate from Nexar, and I'll fully disclose that I'm an investor in the company as well.
Yeah. So yes, I'm Kate Balingit, General Manager of Mobility Services at Nexar. So we're an Israeli-based startup since 2015 with about 80 people. We've raised $60 million to date from everyone from Nationwide Insurance to Alibaba to Samsung Next to Jonathan. He promised not to go easy on me though, so. So at Nexar, we do computer vision, and we basically do object detection of roadside assets and driving conditions. And we do it on the edge, so we're able to do that identification, processing, and indexing within the user's mobile device. I call us the Android operating system of vision. So we can make any camera smart, whether it's a dash cam or an in-vehicle camera, and we can help do visual processing within our own app, but also a mobility provider's app or within the vehicle itself. So it's a really exciting company. I just joined, but I spent 9 years at Google doing automotive and at Waze doing mobility services before this. And when I saw Nexar's technology, I knew I had to be a part of it. So thank you.
Great, and for the last startup on the list, so Modar from Eyeris.
Hello, everyone. My name is Modar Alaoui. I'm a founder and CEO of Eyeris. We're a vision AI, Silicon Valley-based company, and we primarily focus on in-vehicle scene understanding. We basically look at the interior of any vehicle, and we kind of categorize it into 3 groups. That is humans, objects, and surfaces. And over the years, we've developed state-of-the-art neural networks that leverage multiple cameras inside the vehicle, standard 2D cameras, to understand human behavior, objects, and localization, as well as surface classification, all of which for applications that would revolve obviously around safety primarily, but also to augment comfort, convenience, and to enable services. Our customers are typically automotive OEMs and tier 1s, and we do fairly believe that the future vehicle will have multiple cameras on the inside, just the same way it does have now and will continue to have multiple cameras on the outside. We are also firm believers that to augment or to optimize safety, you have to harmonize or, in a way, synchronize exterior perception with interior perception. Thank you.
And lastly, BJ from Mando.
Hi, my name is BJ Kim. I'm from the Silicon Valley, Mando Silicon Valley office. I'm the one of the founding members and head of Mando Innovation Silicon Valley. Mando is one of active automotive tier 1 suppliers by having the key components of vehicles. Here the meaning of key components is necessary actuators and the sensors, such as brakes, steering, suspension, and automotive radar and camera systems. We also develop the technologies for the micro-mobility systems based on our electric bike experience. So as a tier 1 supplier, we think we have a responsibility to keep making technical improvements to make the systems, to make the system to show the kind of expected performance. But more importantly, we need to make the products to be more safer and safer. So one of the keywords we are focusing on our next generation products is the redundancy. So we have been saying that we need a kind of multiple sensor fusion technique so that we can make sure we can represent the environment information correctly. And also redundancy in the actuator parts. If we think about the kind of actuators in the autonomous driving system, you need to make sure whether you have a redundant, the backup system once you have a failure in the car. So in that sense, I mean, we are very active players, automotive players at the moment. So what we are doing in the Silicon Valley area is trying to make a partnership as many as possible so that we can find the possible synergies and the possibilities for the going forward on top of our technical experiences.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. So as both Danny and Tony talked about this morning, new autonomous and new mobility solutions are really going to require a very complex coalescence of different sensors, computing power, machine vision, energy storage, and various other complex tools and capabilities. So what I'm wondering about is what building blocks do we really think are the most important for autonomy to really take hold? And maybe I'll start with Jarek from your perspective from Google.
Sure. So my focus area is machine learning. And previously on the panel, there was a lot of information shared about how the future is about experiences, and software is quite important. So machine learning will power a lot of the new experiences. And the models that are actually running are not exactly like software. And this is something that we've been discovering for quite some time at Google and trying to build systems to help the engineers working on these models improve them, deploy them safely, test them, evaluate them. And one thing we found is people actually have a full appreciation for that only when something blows up in their face. So it's very hard to teach that ahead of time. So what we decided to focus on, in addition to education, but also embodying some of the best practices into systems that we share with the world through some of the open source initiative, for example, TensorFlow. So I think that is going to be key to actually enable this exciting future, is really learning how to replicate the processes that we know worked well in software engineering, such as version control, testing, all that. How do we actually do that for machine learning and for machine learning models? I think that's going to be critical.
Mm-hmm. Kate, what's your perspective on it?
I mean, I think you need all of these channels to create a composite vision of kind of the reality of the road, right? So you definitely need vision for object detection and building out an extensive neural library of facts, not just what is a cone or what is a bicyclist, but a knowledge graph. What is in a construction zone? It's composed of cones. It's composed of signs. So you need vision. You need LiDAR because it's much more effective in things like ambient conditions. I like the analogy, you need LiDAR to find Batman. If you want to find a motorcyclist wearing all black, LiDAR is going to help you do that. And of course, you need GPS, to make that hairpin turn. You need like that 10 millimeter accuracy. And right now, GPS, I mean, it's like 1 to 3 meters. It's maybe 10 meter accuracy sometimes in places like Manhattan. But I don't think these technologies exist in isolation. So, at Nexar, our researchers have actually made a lot of strides in GPS and localization using vision. So they've taken billions of images in our neural library and from the 400 million miles of roads that we've covered, and actually achieved some pretty impressive lane localization in Manhattan. So, all of these components are necessary, but I think people are getting really creative about how to bring them all together in new ways.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So you obviously look outside the car. Maybe Modar thinking more in vehicle. What's your perspective on it?
So it definitely is this sensor fusion thing, and it's just like as humans, we rely primarily on 5 senses. However, about 80 to 85% of our human brain's energy goes towards vision. So that should not be any difference from what should be deployed basically in a vehicle. So vision or perception in general is extremely important, not only on the outside, but also on the inside. At the end of the day, this entire autonomous thing is about safety, and it can only be optimized once again if exterior perception can actually be fused with interior perception. That is on the vision side. And of course, that can still be married further with additional sensors in order to optimize safety all around the vehicle from the inside out.
Great. So since 2010, there's been a ton of capital that's flowed into this industry. I think it's $220 billion has flowed into new mobility solutions, $120 billion in the last 24 months alone. SoftBank has obviously been extremely active. It's also created a ton of value, right? You had companies like Tesla worth $3 billion in 2010 and worth 60 today. Uber from 10 or so to 75. Waymo, some argue, is worth 175 billion. So maybe to get a little bit more of the investor perspective, where are Silicon Valley investors putting their money today? So maybe I'll start with you, Daniel.
So there are quite a few investors in Silicon Valley, and mobility is becoming one of the hottest areas to invest in these days, and that's why we started AutoTech Ventures, because we believe that in times of rapid transformation and disruption, there's the opportunity for massive financial returns. Silicon Valley investors are investing in a whole bunch of different aspects of the ecosystem, and frankly, it's all over the map. What I see here in South Korea is based on limited exposure. I haven't been here for very long, but I'm seeing a lot of discussion around electric vehicles, battery technology, sensors, autonomous, things like that. I would say that Silicon Valley is probably a little bit more diverse in what we focus on. We do look at all those areas, but there's also a lot of interest in business model innovations. And if you look at Uber and Lyft as examples of this, you know, there's arguably not that much IP, especially when they're early stage companies, and yet they generate a massive amount of shareholder value. We have companies in our portfolio, marketplaces. So Uber and Lyft are both marketplaces, and marketplaces in general drive a disproportionate share of shareholder returns, even post-IPO. And so, for example, we have a company in our portfolio that is a marketplace in the RV space, the camper van rental industry that has gone from zero to several $100 million in revenue in just 3 years. So that has generated a ton of shareholder value, become a very valuable company. So I would say that outside of the deep tech and the IP-heavy companies, also marketplaces, SaaS companies, and fintech, a lot of opportunities in insurance and things like that. Even micromobility is not quite as hot as it used to be, but even that is not, you know, necessarily a deep tech area. It's more of a marketplace or SaaS kind of model, depending how you look at it.
Thanks. BJ, so you've obviously come out of you know, a Korean large tier one ADAS experience, and now obviously moving into investments in Silicon Valley. So what's your perspective on where investments headed right now?
Yeah, still, I think the answer would be the autonomous driving sector still, especially new sensors and new software utilizing the artificial intelligence and machine learning, definitely. But one of the interesting fact in recent investment trend is the size of the investment is much bigger than the previous era. So we saw the news that the Volkswagen decided a huge investment fund to Argo.ai, and the Honda also made an investment on the cruise automation, which is GM's autonomous driving partner. So overall, I think it is interesting to see that the investment funds are moving towards to either to the bigger investment pool or to the kind of the companies which has a more realistic revenue model. The markets are getting more smarter, so definitely the investment fund goes to the kind of much kind of reasonable sectors nowadays. So we are still looking for new sensors and software companies which has a reasonable revenue model and reasonable kind of driving force that can keep going on. So I think that's the main thing we look at these days.
And maybe Gunhee, you're a little bit more of the out-of-the-box type of you know, startup to invest in. Already raised $100 million, I think, in the Series A. So where are folks putting their capital today?
Well, first of all, keep in mind we're still in Series B, and when a VC asks us such a question, I should answer that the trend is to invest in Hyperloop.
Of course.
Well, besides, I think what we really want to focus on right now is the safety. Everything needs to be based on safety, and on top of the safety, we can build a whole new industry for passenger experience, the telecommunication within the mobility. So we can provide a lot of new different services inside the transportation itself once we have a secured way for people to spend their time in a more productive and in a more entertained way. So it's really the safety.
All right, so we've talked about the areas that have gotten capital, right? Micromobility, ride sharing, sensors. So what's the undiscovered area, right? Where is value still not been captured yet? So maybe I'll start with you Daniel, again.
Yeah, so we look for value and shareholder returns in all sorts of different areas, and we have 4 companies focused on autonomous driving and various flavors of that, sensor technology and autonomous. So we are all in on that sector. That said, we also look for undiscovered, not as exciting areas where there may still be a ton of opportunity to make money. Parking is one example. Where we're investors in the leading parking marketplace across the United States. But an area that I'm personally passionate about is buses. And so we invested in an African company called Swivel in Egypt. And they grew 16x year over year. And they're a marketplace of sorts for ride sharing for buses with commuters to help get the commuters to work every day. And so for me, I think there's a ton of opportunity in buses because buses are expensive fixed assets that are underutilized. Just like cars. In cars, you see companies like Uber and Lyft and Get Around and Turo, and these are all finding ways to increase the utilization of these expensive fixed assets. Airbnb also increases the utilization of your home, which is an expensive fixed asset. But the opportunity to invest in buses, which are expensive fixed assets, I think has a lot of potential, and it's a space that's generally overlooked.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, by the way, on buses. I mean, it's an area that obviously passenger vehicles have really not been electrified, for example. It's an area, you have 2% sales in the US, 5% in China, but already 20% penetration of buses are being electrified. For example, we're invested in Proterra, which is the leading non-Chinese electric bus company. So maybe over to you, Modar. Love your perspective on kind of underinvested areas that still have value opportunity.
So I think we covered this slightly yesterday over dinner. We spoke about data, right? So everybody's kind of, they know the potential for data. They know it's probably the end game for this entire event of autonomous, electrified, et cetera, et cetera. Yet there haven't been some concrete models that explain exactly how to utilize the data, who owns it, how to rev share it, and what's the overall opportunity from it, because everybody's kind of learning on a job. Data is still being deployed, I guess, more and more, or generated or gathered more and more. That is an area that I'll be extremely excited about. Generating data from vehicles, understanding every person's move or every vehicle's move, making things much more efficient, safer, and hyper-customized or hyper-customizing surfaces and experiences for the riders in a new ridership economy is an area that I'm extremely excited about.
So I think that actually transitions well then to the next question I wanted to talk about, which is 5G communication and data. So, this is my first time in Korea. It's been a great trip so far, and definitely you're seeing a real focus here on the 5G rollout. Obviously, SK, which is a partner in this event, has really moved to near a full nationwide rollout of 5G. And everyone talks about 5G as kind of the holy grail of communication for autonomous vehicles. Particularly in the US, it's taking a long time, and it's been really, really expensive. So what are the views of the folks on the panel of the need for these kind of communication capabilities of 5G, and maybe other communication paradigms that kind of can come up? And how does that maybe flow into some of the idea that you were talking about, Modar, around data exchanges and where economic value can be unlocked? So maybe I'll start with you, Kate, because I think you probably have some perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of the chicken and the egg problem around 5G monetization in the US of CSPs being reluctant to make these huge infrastructure investments when it's not really clear how much more revenue that's going to generate. There's the promise of being able to deliver autonomous vehicle services and smart city services, but it's taking a while for those markets to really grow. We've been talking to some big CSPs in the US about testing, could we do compute on the edge in their small cells and deliver these like sub, 10 millisecond detections. But you made a point about how important safety is and the investments going into safety. And so we at Nexar think that we can't wait for 5G to deliver safety for things like vehicle-to-vehicle communication. So our technology has made it possible to deliver V2V safety alerts just using 3G and just using 4G. So I don't think we have to wait for this rollout and this kind of promise of 5G being the savior and enabling, AV. I think that you can, be creative, especially when we talk about the fresh data economy, about publishing roadside annotations and, enabling over-the-top safety alerts. And you don't necessarily need 5G to do that, as we've shown.
But for V2V, sort of vehicle-to-vehicle communication, how necessary do you think that is?
So our approach to vehicle is to think beyond, the DSRC versus cellular V2X, debate which continues to rage on. And so what we do for V2V is, we use our vision to basically, detect and process and index roadside objects and events, and then we publish those to what is essentially a virtual subnet of hexagonal tiles across the face of the Earth. We're driving a new IETF standard with Cisco and academia to basically tile the Earth with IP addresses. And so this enables you to send a detection, a safety alert of, there's an obstruction in the middle of the roadway, and then anyone kind of tuning into that geostate can then avoid that. They can be directed to switch lanes. So again, this is all technically V2V that's enabled by 3G and 4G if you're using this kind of approach with virtual IP addresses on the road itself. That kind of V2V, it doesn't rely on communication from vehicles in your immediate vicinity. You're able to publish annotations that people can see minutes or hours later. So again, that first question around autonomous vehicles and, vision versus LiDAR versus, things like V2V and GPS, I think it can all work together. And when you, take this kind of scrappy startup approach, you can think of creative ways to meet some of the really important needs today with technology that's already available, like mobile devices.
So Gunhee, from your perspective, and I know 5G and communication is really important for Hyperloop. So how do you kind of see the necessity and the opportunities there?
Oh, yes. Hyperloop capsule can reach up to 1,200 kilometers per hour. So, of course, as you mentioned, the safety is really the first. But another area that we can also define here is the passenger experience using 5G. So I can give you one example. The Hyperloop capsule travels inside a steel tube, enclosed steel tube, meaning you're not going to be able to see the actual scene outside the window. Instead, we have this new technology called Augmented Window. So it's a display window, and then with the camera tracking the head motion of the passengers, you can lean towards the window and try a different angle, and then the display will automatically adjust the perspective, so letting the passengers feel like they're looking at something real outside. So, and now I'm talking about the passenger experience inside the capsule that runs pretty fast. So having the 5G, the high-speed network supporting this entire system would be a huge benefit for Hyperloop.
And maybe, BJ, I'm just curious from your perspective, coming more out of the ADAS world, how necessary is the 5G communication protocols and availability?
So, yeah, I think the 5G is definitely needed because ADAS sensors currently have a limited range. So if you think about the range you can use, definitely you need more information in a further distance. So in that sense, definitely the 5G information is necessary. But although I'm not an expert on the 5G, but as I know, the 5G is all about the speed, bandwidth, and the latency. So those all factors are really beneficial to realize the autonomous driving. But the thing we want to make sure is the reliability, whether we can keep having the sensor information, that 5G information, without having lost any latencies. Although, I mean, the strength of the 5G is definitely latency and the bandwidth and the speed. But we want to have some do some experiments whether that communication signal is reliable or not. Yeah, that's my thought.
So maybe taking a little bit of a step back, this morning we've talked a lot about various legacy OEMs and new OEMs like Tesla. We've talked about kind of Uber and Didi and companies maybe like Grab that have created a lot of shareholder value. So who can be the biggest potential winners, and particularly as it relates to autonomy? So let's look in a little crystal ball. Maybe Daniel, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm going to take a slightly contrarian answer to that.
It's always good.
I like as an investor, when you think differently, there's more potential for returns than thinking the way everybody else does. So I tend to think a little bit differently. As I mentioned, we do have a number of mainstream bets in autonomous technology. But we're also taking a little bit of different bets as well, and that's in off-highway autonomy. And so we believe that so one of the challenges with autonomy is simply the number of different types of scenarios you need to plan for. And whether it's children or caps or cones or construction zones or weather or whatever, I mean, there's so many different things. The alternative is to operate in controlled environments where there are many fewer variables. So for example, construction sites, mines, farms, and so we believe that in certain off-highway autonomy scenarios, there is much more potential in the short term to have a huge impact on transforming an industry without having to deal with as many considerations. And so we believe that off-highway autonomy, there's actually a lot of potential.
Oh, interesting, okay. Modar, what's your perspective?
So it's hard to predict. We're trying to avoid the question altogether, I guess.
It's okay,
but,
we're not going to Vegas yet.
Always hard to predict.
So it's hard to predict, but if I were to actually give my personal assumption, it is companies that are trying to gain a lot of knowledge through a lot of data in geo-fenced areas, and therefore there's a new term or terminology called the geoautonomy. And to Dan's comments earlier, it is, in my opinion, companies that can perfect the drive-in conditions with optimized safety in these geo-fenced areas. Companies like Tesla that take like a generalized approach where they want to make autonomous driving safer pretty much in any crowded city, in my opinion, is a little bit of a harder challenge. Given the large number of corner cases that cannot be covered neither during simulation nor during real-world driving, although they collect continuously data through shadow driving, etc. I think it will just take a little bit longer, and the consumers will have to hear autonomous vehicles or autonomy in general with a bit of a grain of salt.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
If I can interject, taking inspiration from Scott and thinking of a historical reference to maybe ground ourselves on. I think that we can take a lesson from the telco industry and really the first digital economy around information. So if you think about it, the telcos really lost out on that, the AT&Ts and Verizons, because they were the ones providing the pipes and arguably had like the most reach, but it was people who came over the top like Google and Facebook and built these really high margin services. And I think there's a strong chance that we'll see that in automotive as well, that you have the manufacturers that have the reach and essentially have the infrastructure with the vehicles themselves, but the winners will be the people like Uber who can pull off Silicon Valley margins by delivering those over-the-top services. So I think it's really important for OEMs and suppliers even right now to be thinking how am I going to create services? How can I create high margin, user experiences and not suffer the same fate of the telcos as, automotive now goes through the same digital revolution that information went through, like a decade or two ago.
Oh, thanks. So like it or not, I think we have to talk about regulation. Regulatory environment is going to be pretty critical for AV adoption. And certainly we're living in a hyper-polarized world. I think we were talking last night over dinner that is globalization dead? Certainly things like CFIUS, trade wars, and moves toward localization trends and regulation over machine learning and AI are impacting how we think about autonomous vehicles and future mobility solutions. So I'm curious to hear kind of the thoughts and perspectives of some of the folks on the panel. Maybe, Jarek, I'll start with you, because obviously machine learning is top of mind for you and for Google.
Sure. So I have kind of two thoughts on this. So first of all, I would like to believe that any technology that is beneficial for society will find its way into the mainstream, because a lot of people driving the technology are engineers, researchers that actually truly want to make a world a better place. And this is in fact true in the space I'm in, because if you look at progress in machine learning, a lot of the models, progress on model architectures, this is all public research that is published on the web, and anybody can read it and implement it. Moreover, a lot of the data sets used to train these models are also public models, and there's more data sets being released that are public. So I'm a bit of an optimist when it comes to that. And then when it comes to regulation, I mentioned previously the importance of actually trying to build best practices into systems that are then used to actually deploy these best practices. So in our industry, obviously, there's a lot of focus on data regulation. So one example being GDPR coming out of European Union. And having had some experience with GDPR now at Google, one of the things that we found that works really well is making sure that the system that we work on, TFX, actually embodies the best practices. So for example, say you collect user data, and in order to improve the user experience that we all want to do, say in-car recommendations on a head unit for some songs or whatever, when the user switches from Byton car to another car and they don't want previous supplier to actually have the data, you need to be able to purge that information from your model, and not only the model but also the artifacts potentially created in the process of training the model and shared by other models. So the situation gets very complex very quickly. And the key part is to just, embody the regulatory aspect in the systems that are used by engineers to develop the product.
Mm-hmm. Maybe switching gears a little bit, but staying kind of on the regulation front, BJ, working for a Korean-based company, obviously with significant operations outside of just Korea, and particularly in the US, how do you think about how the regulatory environment and hyperlocalization can impact your business?
Yeah, the regulatory environment is I think it's a hard question. But we know somehow the regulation can help for increasing the market adoption. For example, if we think about the previous safety systems like seatbelt, airbag, anti-lock brake system, and electric stability control system. So there are some reports says that significant amount of reduction in the fatal crashes, in car crashes on the road, has shown. I mean, ever since we had mandatory actions of these components. But when you think about the autonomous driving and think about the regulatory discussion, we see there are a bunch of regulatory discussion between engineers and government people, but still in a discussion. They're discussing about what to test and where to test. I mean, what kind of tools they use and what type of kind of criteria they can accept for the safety level of the autonomous driving. But I think the technology is still pretty new, still we need some more time to discuss this type of regulatory kind of enactment. So I think in our case, we are more focused on the current test protocols. There is a new car assessment program in different countries, such as Euro NCAP and the Nizza NCAP. Those type of global NCAP, the new car assessment program, is one of the things we can focus on in order to make sure the car is designed in a safer way. So they are providing the kind of ratings so that the consumers can recognize the level of safety in the vehicle they purchase. So we are focusing more on that. Over time we develop this type of ADAS and safety features. I think we can get more closer to the regulatory the discussion more and more.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Gunhee, I'll just ask you from your perspective. It's a technology that obviously requires government influence in order to be able to roll it out. You talked about Dubai, right? They obviously have strong control over their own development. They've done a great job in the last number of years. So how do you think about both the relationship with government in terms of the rollout, and then maybe on the other side of it, you talked about raising a Series B, and where you bring that capital from, CFIUS laws and things of that sort as an American company?
Well, first of all, we don't have Hyperloop sectors under the Department of Transport in every other countries yet. Well, I think the key is the active communication. So what we're doing right now is to actively bring the information to the local governments and see how we can bring up the standardization of this new transportation. So we just recently completed the generic guideline, the world's first Hyperloop generic guideline with TÜV-SÜD, and we submitted the document to the European Commission. In the United States, Elaine Chao actually just recently announced that the DOT will soon have a council for emerging transportation technologies, including Hyperloop. So now it's really all about providing enough information, educating the public sector, and see how we can provide the right environment for the governments to come up with the right regulatory framework. Yeah.
Great. So maybe bringing it back a little closer to home, we have a packed audience of 800 folks here, both from large corporations and startups in the automotive sector here in Korea, and all here to kind of learn a little bit more about the global industry and maybe how to partner and work together. So what I would love to get a little perspective on is both from kind of the startup side here and maybe the larger corporate side of how to really partner. How should Korean both startups and corporates think about partnership opportunities in this global landscape? So maybe I'll start with you, Kate.
Yeah, I think coming from Israel, a country of 9 million people without any major tier one suppliers or auto manufacturers, partnerships are everything. So including starting with events like this and inviting in people with kind of emerging technologies. I think a big thing is the approach using open architecture. So as I've said, Nexar is very much an operating system for vision. So, there are compatible cameras on the market, but, we could deliver our vision software through an over-the-air update if, the hardware partner had an open architecture. So I think, first of all, it takes willingness, and this conference is a testament to it, and then it takes kind of building in more of an open architecture to your supply chain.
Maybe BJ, I'm curious, there's a lot of talk in the room, or at least as I talk to some folks outside, about potential technology gaps that have actually been created over the last couple of years between maybe the US, Silicon Valley, and Korea. So how do you think about it, trying to bridge the gap as both a Korean company but based in the Valley?
So in terms of the ADAS features, we don't have that much gap from the US market and the Korean market. But when we say about the autonomous driving features, we still need some kind of the technical the capabilities to follow up. For example, I think new sensors, as I mentioned earlier, new sensors and software, artificial intelligence and machine learning. That's the part we need to develop more, I think, in Korea. So still in automotive industry, I think there are lots of desire to put more artificial intelligence application inside of the car in the auto industry sector. So depending on the application, you can still apply lots of different AI applications and softwares. So what we are doing in Silicon Valley is trying to meet the partners and the startup companies and IT companies so that we can bring the synergies with the new sensors and new softwares. One of the things that I want to emphasize from that point is the companies in Silicon Valley is putting more emphasis in the demonstration. I remember the time when we visited Eyeris and we had a great demo from this company. So now the company, venture capitalists and the corporate venture capitalists know that the realizing this just simple autonomous driving demo is trivial matter because we have some actuators and the sensors we can buy. Just putting all together and just running around the kind of small area is very mundane job now. So just emphasizing the technical values and the business value from the startup is an important factor, I think.
Interesting perspective. And Daniel, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, one of the models that obviously we're very familiar with, given what we do, is there are a number of large corporations, tier one suppliers, OEMs, et cetera, that invest in venture funds. And they do that in order to get access to startups that could affect them. And so we see about 1,000 deals per year, and we track them all in a database. And the companies that invest in us have access to information in our database. Not all of it. We don't share the pitch decks, but some summary information about each company, just a few sentences. And then anytime we see a match between what a startup is doing and what one of our corporate investors is doing, we actively facilitate that connection. And that's a win for everybody. That's a win for the startup. It's a win for the big corporation, and ultimately it's a win for us. And we do it for free because we make our money in other ways. So that's a model that has worked for many tier one suppliers and large corporations, and we see it increasingly commonly.
Thanks.
Can I add a
Please.
quick note about partnering with TensorFlow?
Yeah.
So we have a slightly different model. We are open source software. TensorFlow is being used by millions of developers and is deployed on over 2 billion devices, mobile devices. So one good place to start is always GitHub, GitHub/TensorFlow. And then that's a good way to collaborate. We do a lot of our design reviews in public. So if there's functionality that may not be necessarily something that we thought about, we value your feedback. So go on tensorflow.org or GitHub TensorFlow and partner with us.
Yeah, maybe I'll just finish with Gunhee on that point, because we talked last night over dinner about, your approach is not to try to do everything yourself, but really to try to partner in an ecosystem. So how do you think about potential partnership opportunities with the Korean ecosystem?
Well, Hyperloop could be seen as a very heavy infra project, and we're still in Series B, and we want to be as lean as possible. As a company for Hyperloop, we're trying to be a licensing company, the technology licensing company. We don't want to do A to Z by ourselves. We want the cutting edge technologies from around the world, not just by ourselves everything. So we're not developing everything in-house, but for example, our vacuums from Germany, the company called Leybold, which invented the vacuum technology back in like centuries ago. Our maglev is from California, Lawrence Livermore. Our capsule fuselage is from Spain. So we're really combining these IPs together, and we're licensing these technologies out to the local governments, the local operators, and making it their own Hyperloop business. So in the near future, we hope to have some of the Korean companies to also join this partnership. Actually, I'm actually the only Korean in this headquarters, and sometimes engineers just come to me and talk about these great technologies from South Korea. And then they ask me, Gunhee, do you know this? Do you know that? Well, they're the market leader, but I don't know. Well, the engineers know, of course. So we have a huge potential in sensors, batteries, civil engineering, a lot of different areas we can collaborate. So looking forward to.
And I think that's probably similar down the line with the other startups on the stage. Definitely looking for partnership opportunities, investment, from the local startups and large corporates. So I've been asked to kind of pass it back to maybe see if we can get one or two questions from the audience.
Yes, your thoughts and insights is definitely interesting. I could hear you talk all day, but unfortunately we have to stop for now. And we're going to open it up to the audience for a couple of questions. 저희 패널들에게 질문이 있으신 분들은 손을 들어주시면 저희가 마이크를 전달드리겠습니다. 한국어로 질문하시는 경우에는 저희 하이퍼룹 TT의 한건희 제너럴 매니저님께서 수고해 주시겠습니다. 저희 질문 있으실까요?
쉬운 질문을 해주세요.
네, 안녕하십니까. 예, 저는 스타트업을 준비 중인데요. 오늘 많은 지혜와 여러 비즈니스적인 전략까지 많이 얻을 수 있어서 고맙습니다. 많은 분들께서 좋은 말씀을 많이 해주셔서 너무너무 고맙고요. 저는 비전에 관심이 많은데 그래서 넥사에서 오신 케이트 벌링잇 분께 질문이 있는데요. 운전자는 이렇게 초보 운전자도 있고 베스트 드라이버도 있잖아요. 초보 운전자는 도로 환경에 대한 경험이 부족하고 그다음에 인지 학습 경험도 부족하고 그다음에 각각의 위험 회피 능력 케이스에 대한 경험도 부족하고 그리고 이렇게 운전 스킬 그 세 가지가 다 이렇게 부족해서 베스트 드라이버보다 운전을 못할 수밖에 없는데 그래서 자율주행에서도 그러한 케이스별 이렇게 회피 능력, 운전 기술 같은 메모리를 가지고 있고 그러한 메모리별로 케이스별로 그러한 메모리에 얼마나 빠르게 접근할 수 있는가에 따라 가지고 자율주행의 이렇게 수준이 결정될 것 같은데요. 대신 그러한 수준을 잘하기 위해서는 스탠드 얼론 타입으로 해서 하드웨어 성능과 그러한 메모리의 량, 메모리 액세스 스피드 같은 게 결정적일 수밖에 없는데요. 그런 관점에서 볼 때 인간의 운전자보다 사고 확률이 만약에 30% 수준인 스탠드 얼론 타입과 만약에 5G 클라우드로 연결해 가지고 그 사고 확률이 인간의 운전자보다 10% 이하로 더 떨어지는 수준이 가능하고 그러한 클라우드 서비스를 위해서 이렇게 매월 한 $50 정도 수준의 비용을 지불한다면은 운전자들은 어떤 선택을 하게 될까요? 저 같으면은 약간의 사고 확률을 좀 더 줄이기 위해서 월 $50의 비용으로 5G 클라우드로 보다 안전한 서비스를 받을 수 있을 것 같은데 어떠한 선택을 소비자들은 할까 궁금하고요. 그러한 이렇게 비전 솔루션이 넥사에서 이렇게 개발을 하실 때 자율주행 차뿐만이 아니고 로봇 그다음에 AI 어시스턴트 디바이스가 이렇게 수많은 디바이스들이 깔릴 텐데 그런 것들에 있어서 그 비전의 강자가 이렇게 구글이 될지 아니면 넥사가 될지 아니면 다른 스타트업이 될지 그러한 비전 서비스의 궁극적인 공급자는 누가 될 수 있을지 두 가지 질문 드립니다.
So we're going to put Gunhee on the spot to translate that word for word, please.
Every word.
First of all, he's preparing a startup.
I think he gave the whole pitch.
He thanks us for the insights and the business strategies. 그다음 뭐였죠?
So when you develop a vision algorithm,
인간의 운전자에 대비 사고 확률이 30%인 스탠드얼론 자율주행 솔루션과 10% 이하로 떨어지는 이렇게 유료 서비스의 클라우드 5G를 통한 클라우드 서비스 중 어떤 선택을 하게 될지 소비자들은 하고요.
So the comparing the standalone automotive driving versus 10% 어떤 cloud-based 10% cloud-based driving. He wants your insight on which would actually win. After all, I'm not the expert in this field, so maybe.
So when you develop the vision system, so he's asking whether comparing the fully autonomous driving and 10% or 30% of the kind of assistant function with cloud-based kind of information, then do you think you have a kind of market opportunities on the later option?
Given that we're short on time and our lead network product manager, Eleanor, is here, I'm going to suggest that perhaps you chat with her after the panel. Yeah, I think...
Eleanor, please stand up.
What's that?
Please stand up, Eleanor.
Yeah. Woo! Yeah, so essentially we do we kind of cherry pick the images. It would be impossible to stream like video for a 2-hour drive the entire time. So we kind of cherry pick the most interesting and relevant images, process about 10% of it on the edge within the phone, send about 90% up to the cloud for additional kind of deduplication, localization, and processing. So that's as technical as I'll get though, so maybe Eleanor afterwards.
그럼 두 번째 질문에 대한 답은 해주실 수 있을 것 같은데, the second question.
Why don't we take it offline, I think, because we're probably out of time, right?
So, 다시 말씀해 주시겠어요? What was the second question you asked?
거기 로봇이나 자율주행이나 AI 어시스턴트 디바이스의 비전 서비스 프로바이더. Who will be the vision platform service provider in the future? In robot and autonomous driving and any AI vision assistant device.
I think he's trying to ask that, there are a lot of service providers, like AI providers, autonomous driving, cloud system, robots. There are like different sorts of service providers. And in the end, I think he wants to ask who's going to be the winner.
Okay, why don't we go down the line and make that like the final question? Let's get one, maybe I'll suggest it as a moderator.
Yeah, that's going to be our final question.
We're going to put everyone on the spot here. One word answer, maximum of what the biggest sector of disruption and a potential value creation gain in this new mobility sector. So I will start at BJ since he looked like he was ready to answer.
So I think the solution is depending on the applications. I mean, you cannot apply the the vision system for autonomous driving to the robotic system, other kind of bipedal robots or others. I mean, all algorithms depends on the application. So I don't think there will be a winner for whole system. I mean, there must be some couple of winners in a different industry sector.
Modar, one word, biggest sector of disruption, subsector of disruption in future mobility.
Data.
Kate?
Yeah, fresh data economy. I think McKinsey pegged it at 450 billion to 750 billion, and I think it's the one where it's got the most potential, but people haven't quite figured out how to use that crude oil and turn it into profitable services. So I think it's the most exciting one. So yeah, fresh data economy.
Since they already said data, I want to add safety and redundancy.
So if I could predict the future, I would work for Dan or you, but I would just stick to systems for now. But I do agree with the panelists here. I think the difference that we are seeing right now with the systems that are being deployed is they operate in the real world, and the real world is always changing. However, we use technology that we don't fully understand because it's not explicitly programmed. We train it like you train a child, right? So like if you can actually have access to fresh data and you continue evaluate your systems, which you must for safety, then I think you'll do well. So this is a very exciting space to be in.
Daniel?
I'll go with the party vote on this one. Stick with data.
Okay, I'll stick with data as well. Thank you very much to all my panelists, and thanks everyone for the time. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Please give it up for our panelists.